Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean Friedman. I'm Director of Planning at the City of Peekskill. This is our second public meeting for the Brown, South, and South Division Streetscape project. We had very good input at the first workshop, and we had comments and questions and input from the neighbors and the business owners, and we decided to have a second workshop after we put a plan together. Our consultants put a plan together with the original ideas that were presented, and get further feedback from the neighbors and maybe more specific information. So I'll hand it over to Andy Rimpf, and we have George Kronk here also from Chazen Companies who are preparing the plan. And from here we go into construction documents after we're pretty well set on what we're going to do with the plan. So I'll let Andy explain the project to you. Thank you. Yes.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me all right. My name is Andy Rimpf. I'm Director of our Landscape Architectural Services at the Chazen Companies. And as Jean mentioned, George Kronk in the yellow shirt there is our engineer for the project. So we were here in June, early June, had our kind of first meeting, and at that point we didn't have the luxury of a topographic survey yet, so we presented a concept plan that was derived from essentially the foundations that were laid out with the grant application that was done the year previously. So since then we've now a topographic survey, and we're able to come down to the site, kind of walk the site, try to ground truth some of those concepts that were in there, see if they made sense, or if they didn't, make some changes. So where we're at now is a schematic design level where we're giving everybody a chance to have their next round of input on shaping the plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about the next steps going on. But George, if you want to fast forward to the third slide here. Okay. So basically, I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible for you and give you ample time to ask questions and have any good dialogue that we can have here tonight. I'll go over the project areas, what the project does or does not include in the scope of services, kind of quickly review your existing conditions, and then do an overview of your design concept with the recommended improvements. We have imagery you'll see for specifics to whether it's trees, site furnishings, pavements, things of that nature. And then we'll talk about the schedule of the project, moving forward in the grand scheme, our next steps that are immediate action items, and then we'll wrap up with question and answers. Okay, so the project, for the benefit of those that weren't here last time and a rehash for those that were, the project is a two-phase project. Phase one of the project is Brown Street. It's essentially from the intersection of Division Street heading west for about 2 blocks until you get to the intersection with the Elks there. That project is being administered by the city. So this project does not go in front of other boards for review. The county will have some kind of, input in the project in general, but it's basically a city-run project. So we're designing that project at the same time that we're designing the other projects you see in red, which is what we're calling phase two, which is the South Street and South Division Street project. The project there, corridor-wise, basically goes from Depew Street through the intersection of Union to the intersection of Division Street, and then turns and goes southerly past the church, and then some modest improvements as you kind of start moving up the hill. Backing up a half step on phase one, Esther Street is in that phase one project. I kind of skipped over that. So these two projects are that are running concurrently in the design process. We're designing them both at the same time right now. They will track differently coming up. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule more later. Okay, so what the project in general, and when I call it project, I'm talking about both projects in totality. What the project does include is an emphasis on pedestrian access and safety, through traffic calming measures, ADA improvements, handicap ramp improvements. Some of them you've actually seen the county's done, a few of them, specifically along Division Street here in the last few weeks. Project includes upgrading using city standards, trying to get some continuity within the city with site furnishings, types of trees, street lights, pavement styles. Project includes corridor beautification, which essentially, once again, the same kind of decorative treatments to really kind of liven up the street. Pedestrian scale lighting. The lighting that you have in most of the corridors now, besides one or two pedestrian lights that are at the intersection of South and Division Street, basically everything's your big overhead Cobra lights, your old standard lights. So what we're doing is trying to bring the pedestrian lighting scale back down to the fixtures that you kind of see that are your 14 to 16 foot height LED street lights, post-top acorns. You'll see more of that in a minute. And then we have some green infrastructure that we're trying to introduce throughout the project, whether it's for plantings for bioretention or use of recycled material, things of that nature. What the project does not or does not do, one of the major goals, it does not reduce your on-street parking right now. We can go through the plans. On the sides here, there's actually enlargement plans of the whole corridor of the project so that after the presentation in the meeting, if somebody has anything specific they want to ask, we can kind of pinpoint to your properties or anybody's properties. Modifications to the roadway traffic movements are not anticipated. We're not saying, okay, Esther Street's one way and now we're going to close it off entirely at this point. We're basically saying the way vehicles move through there, whether a car or a truck can turn right, turn left, that's going to be maintained with the project. The project does not include water and sewer improvements. There will be some improvements because anytime you do sidewalks, you're going to have gas valves, water valves, some sewers that are in that walkway that need to be adjusted. But what the project isn't is it's not a project that analyzes and fixes the drainage or the water connections for the 80 businesses and the homes, that are located along the route. And what the project doesn't include is the intention of road and street closures, massive impacts, on the residents while construction's in progress. Go ahead, George. Existing additions, kind of hard to see. So the brief overview of existing additions is you have a lot of different existing conditions out there. A lot of the drainage works pretty well on the roadways, except for a couple of spots, specifically around Division Street. That's not working real well now. You have decent slopes on your sidewalks. You don't have a lot of sidewalks that are really out of pitch and are really poor from an accessibility perspective. There are some that need to be remedied, but in general, you have decent infrastructure from the way the buildings sit in relation to your roadways. You've got every kind of pavement out there probably possible, and so part of the project is really to try to clean some of that up, unify some of that, and bring in new. I think we can go ahead. We can flash back to questions later. Okay, the concept plan. It's a little bit hard to probably read and get the gist of the colors just from here, but once again, starting at Depew, the handicapped crosswalks right now are deficient, so we'd be looking at starting at that intersection, making those repairs. There's certain sidewalks, such as this one here, that are actually in pretty decent shape, so we're going to leave some of those, and some of the others that are showing up later here are going to be removed. So if you were to describe the job in general, picture the roadway corridors, and you have a curb line on both sides. Picture from the curb lines to the right-of-ways or the building face, they're pretty much the same. That's our scope of work. It's fixing curbs, it's fixing sidewalks, it's decorative pavements, it's street trees, it's street lights, it's raising and resetting valves, it's looking at people's Bilco steel access, to the old chutes or cellars and making sure those are structurally sound and not tripping hazards. But basically it's from the curb back to your buildings. The exception to that is here at Union, we have an enlargement here showing one side of it. We're proposing a bump out there. That was in the initial concept, if anybody saw the initial concept. What that does is this sidewalk going across right now is a very long crosswalk. And it takes quite a while to get people over there. you have the truck traffic, or the vehicle traffic coming down Union, and it's a pretty good clip right there, you know, for people to stop. People coming in this way haven't really hit the lights, you know, all that hard yet, so they're gaining a little bit of speed. So what we want to do is shorten that crosswalk up. So one of the traffic calming measures, one of the most effective ones, is to do this bump out here. What the bump out would include is, right here is a loading spot, right where the pointer is now. We would move that loading spot to the other side by realigning the crosswalk and freeing up space. But what that bump out does is it shortens that length, gives pedestrians a real spot of respite at the corners, and kind of tightens everything up in a more downtown friendly way. Once you get past those, back to curb, sidewalk, street trees, and then the same thing along the North Division, or South Division, and on Brown Street. So the project here with South Street and Division Street, once again, it's a DOT-run project. So the right-of-way is very important. For the project to be pulled off in a proper time frame and to within costs that the city has available for the project, we don't want to work outside of the right-of-way. Almost all of it, post-survey, doing boundary survey, almost all of the highway boundary or right-of-way is at the face of the buildings. There's a few spots that are a couple feet off and where the line kind of goes into the sidewalk. And so some of those, we might have to make some adjustments in the field. But for the most part, it's building face in, and then that's all in state right-of-way. Go ahead, George, the next one. What I wanted to really talk about is, here's some kind of typical sections. I'll fly through these, and we'll talk about the specifics of the improvements. So your typical sections, the first one here, this is on South Street. So along this section, you've got a fairly robust sidewalk on the north side. You have about 10 feet, and then we have a 4-foot paver strip. This is kind of a perspective kind of rolling at you. Then you have your on-street parking that currently exists, the 2 lanes of traffic, and where this one's cut through just happens to be where the taper between your parallel parking here and the turn lane is. So that's why that looks like that. And then on the other side, we have 32-inch wide strip together with about 6 feet of sidewalk. So in that corridor, you have pretty ample sidewalks. It gets a little bit tight on this side. And so we're using this banding of the colored textured pavement as this paver strip behind the curb. We're using that proportionally so that it feels right in context. What you have out there right now is essentially 4 feet in this section. Just for reference, visual reference, what you have out there. A lot of what you see in the city is more traditionally around that 32-inch mark to 36. Second section is a section along Division Street. Showing you this because there are certain sections like here which are against the building, which are, you know, roughly 8 feet or so in width. So there's not a lot of width. You get a little bit challenged to try to get some trees and things like that in there.
Your first visual is up.
Yep.
That visual is of South Street.
Correct.
The same as sidewalks on both sides or the same side.
No. This is a section looking this way on South Street. So over here, you have about 14 feet where the section was stopped. The bank side, yep. And on the other side, you only have about 9 feet or so. Oh, sorry. It's essentially 14 versus 9.
Let me just ask, we definitely want your questions or whatever, but the camera needs the microphone in order to pick it up, so maybe we'll wait till the end of the presentation, and then I'll walk around with the microphone so everybody can be heard on the camera, okay? Thank you. Just remember your questions, just jot them down.
Okay, so this third section is on Brown Street, and this section represents, I guess, what you'd want to call it kind of a typical section, where you have somewhere in the vicinity of 11, 12, usually about 12 feet in width, kind of on both sides. And so we're showing some introductions of the trees and the lights, just to kind of show everybody proportion and scale more than anything. Go ahead, George, to the specifics of the recommended improvements. When we talk about pavements and markings, along the edges of the curb lines, we're talking about a banded accent with stamped colored concrete at the moment is the material. scored in a pattern to look like brick, and that's some of the choices for the widths, 4 feet, 32 inches, 24 inches, the traditional 4x8 brick pattern, so it gives us flexibility in whatever patterning we end up with. Crosswalk treatments, they'd be stamp colored. What we're proposing is, right now everything's painted, stamp colored pavements out there, very similar in color and style to this to really bring attention to that crosswalk for the pedestrians. New curbs, as I mentioned, most all of your curbs out there are concrete curbs, so most of the replacement would be with concrete curb. There's a couple of exceptions, specifically near the theater. There's actually a granite curb there. There's a small section of curb replacement we would do there and do it granite in kind so that it kind of kept the continuity there. Minor parking, loading, bus striping modifications. Before you heard me mention we aren't really changing how the spaces are delineated, where loading spaces are, where delivery spaces are, where handicap spaces are. We're pretty much keeping all of that intact. But if you can picture, we're going to saw out in front of the curb a couple feet. We're going to erect the striping, obviously, doing that. So there'd be some cleaning up of the striping and redoing of the striping. Some of the striping's worn out pretty good in a few spots. Some of it could be clarified and made a little bit better. So those are what I call minor striping improvements. The project does not intend to restripe and redelineate the center lines of the roads and things of that nature. That would be done later, through the county. And the project is also important to mention, curb to building. So the pavement conditions in the middle of the road, some of them need addressing at some point, if not already. That's not a part of this project. That's going to be a different thing. Streetscape furnishings, quick run through of those. Pretty much besides, I think, in front of the cafe, there's a bike rack, but I think for the most part, the project corridor is devoid of bike racks or the ability to people to park bikes. So we'd have incorporation of that. This is called a Cyclops model, and this is a different type of Cyclops model that's singular. This is kind of the styles that we're looking at. We're looking for something that's durable, heavy enough made that it's going to kind of stand up to the test of time. Benches, you can see this bench here, kind of similar to the one that's on North Division Street already. The intention would be a metal bench, 6 feet long, with the ends, so that's a deterrent for skateboarders to not use them, and also for people to not sleep, on the benches. So that would be the style that we'd be going for there. Bollards, I'll talk a little bit more about the bollards, but a decorative bollard that would match the base of the lights, so there'd be some continuity with the lights we would use. And trash receptacles, there's a lot of trash receptacles already out there. Some of them are in poor shape, some of them need to be reconditioned, some of them are bent, things of that nature. We're not proposing a brand new style. We're proposing to relocate, redistribute, clean up what's there. Parking meters, I think it's fair, and Gene, tell me if I say anything out of tune. But right now, we're going to leave, since we're leaving the parking where it is, we're leaving the meters where they are. There's other dialogue that we've heard that could be a change from the pay stations, or to a pay station type thing. But right now, that is not an action item. So right now, we're basically going to work around those, reset them if they need to be, reset, but basically keep the current payment system in place. So what I call vertical streetscape elements, a quick overview of those. Pedestrian scale light fixtures. Here's one that's already out there on Brown Street, or on South Street. It's painted green, but the top is similar to what the city standard is. It's not quite the same. This one here is the top of the city standard, which is an LED light with downward optics and this Augusta pole, they call it. But basically, that's the city's Sternberg standard, so we'd be using that. This is very similar, except for it's green, and the top is slightly different. Tree plantings. We have a mixture of trees that we propose now on the schematic design. We're looking for trees that'll grow and thrive in an urban condition and and not preclude, activity. So that honey locust is an example of one. There's actually two that are out there in front of the restaurant. Pardon me for the name. What's the Hudson Room? Sorry, out in front of the Hudson Room. London plane tree, which are the 5 big trees that are out by the parking lot further down Brown Street by the Elks, the municipal lot there. Princeton elm, which is a pretty standard street tree, hardy tree, can limb them up high. Greenspire linden, very similar in form and habitat. A serviceberry, which is a smaller tree. We're proposing in front of the Hudson Room, for instance, to take out the locusts that are there and to put in smaller height, kind of mid-scale, more decorative flowering trees, such as the serviceberry. Signage, I consider those vertical elements because they're all over the place and you see a lot of them out there. Most of the signage seems pretty adequate when it comes to the transportation roadway network informing, people where they can park, where they can turn, all of that. But a lot of them are kicked over to the side. A lot of them are old, rusty-looking posts, things like that. So what we would be doing is basically putting in new posts and keeping most of the sign language consistent. There will be some evolution of that as we get through the project, but the general intent is to maintain what's there. Go ahead, George. Oh, I'm sorry, flip back one. Lied to you. Tree pits. It's a little hard to see off of this. I do have a couple of the PowerPoint presentations that have better color imagery if you want to flip through them later. But there's a lot of different ways to handle tree pits. Most of what you see in the downtown right now is the open dirt tree pits. They can get weedy, in my opinion. They get weedy, they collect some trash, things of that nature. Hard to kind of keep mulch in them, things of that nature. So 2 applications to consider that we're considering is one is kind of your standard iron tree pit. Pros and cons of those. Pros is they're very hardy. You put them in right, everything's true and level, and they look nice. One of the negatives is people can drop cigarette butts, things like that in them. It's hard to get in and actually do something about it and clean them up. What I have seen a lot of, and I have a personal affinity to, is this picture. It's hard to see. This is a brown color of it. This is a black color of it. This is it being installed. But what this is called Flexi Pave, which is essentially a poured rubber surface, where you pour the rubber in, and it's got some good value as far as using recyclable material. But it's porous, so it lets water go through, but it sets up hard like if you've ever been to a playground where you've got that hard rubber surface, not the crumbly stuff, but the finished surface, so you can sweep it off, you can power wash it off, you can do things of that nature, and it's level. So that's the thought that I personally would recommend, but we can talk more as we go through. So next is so the bump out. We talked a lot about the bump out already. There is some drainage right there. Both sides, there's a pretty good crown right there. So when we're talking about bringing those bump outs in, we're bringing the bump outs into that crown. So in a lot of respects, there's probably going to be a curb reveal that's less than the full 6-inch curb reveal around those corners. So on this one, we'd have decorative bollards on this side to kind of, here's a picture of an example of one here. The drainage, we would need a couple of new structures. That's our only true drainage in the project that we're proposing at the moment. We would need to take those catch basins, collect the water in advance of them now. This is a picture of a bioretention. You have some of this, not exactly the same, but similar on North Division Street. It's a really good environmental tool to collect runoff and a green filter, put it back into the system. So that you'll see signified right here. So water would kind of come in and then eventually be tied in and sent out. Go ahead, George. Okay, Esther Street. So Esther Street, in the initial concept, we're not that dissimilar to the initial concept. The picture of Esther Street right now, shows it's a one-way road with 3 parking spaces on one side with a loading zone. It's used for trucks that don't want to make that or can't make that kind of acute turn from South Division onto Broad. So trucks do come down. It has a fairly decent slope to it. So one of the things we're contemplating, and it's in the design at the moment, is there an opportunity within this area of the downtown to have a space that could be blocked off seasonally or occasionally so that if you had a special event or something that really supported the businesses in the community, you had a space to do it. So the concept would be to use decorative pavements. These are kind of different examples, but decorative pavements in the roadway, maintain the ability of this road to be open at all the times, but put something similar to this bollard on each side that had the ability to be chained or roped, because if you close the street now for special events, you've probably seen it where they probably put police barricades or the big orange, markers. This would give an ample opportunity for you to be able to do something different, and the bollards would be there. So the road would stay open most of the time, but have the ability to be shut down for special events if needed. So that concept is still in the plan. The pavement would be decorative concrete, and the reason that would be specifically concrete in this section is it's a fairly steep ascent. So if you had stamped asphalt, that tends to, on a slope where you have braking, it tends to be worn out quicker. So go ahead, George, to the next. Okay. So I gave you a rundown. I'm sure some people have questions. We're more than happy to answer them in a minute. I'm going to give you a rundown on the schedule because everybody wants to know, I'm sure, how does it impact, my business, how does it impact, my life and my customers. And as I said before, we're in concept design right now. We've basically gone through this concept design. We're now at a part where we're getting closer to reality of what we're showing is what's truly proposed. We've vetted out a lot of these things initially. So our next step with the DOT in their process is a design report, they call it, where all of the environmental issues are analyzed together with your schematic designs, submitted to DOT. They have a review period. It could take a couple of months. They have a review period on the project, its conformity with the available funding, their standards, their recommendations, any of the environmental concerns. We haven't identified any, but Section 106 historical review is a mandatory part of that process. So that'll all happen here. Our intention is somewhere between Thanksgiving and early December that we will be prepared to present that to the DOT in a formal submission. The next slide has some initial next steps, but our real next step is we're here tonight to present, but then also to listen, to make modifications, and to put together our first real ground truth cost estimate. I have an idea of the project and its relation to the budget. Until we go through this analysis more thoroughly, then we won't really know. There may be some choices that need to be made in that process. We're not real sure, but whether it's brick, concrete, asphalt, those type of choices, kind of come into play during that process. So when we submit that gets us into the DOT review queue, let's call it. And it allows us during that time, we can still advance some of our work that's not at risk. But basically during the winter, we'd be working on the construction drawings. ADP is Advanced Design Plans in DOT lingo. So we would have kind of those final CDs done this winter for the DOT project, which once again is the South Street and Division Street project. And at the same time, we'll work the final CDs for the Phase 1, the Brown Street project, here this fall and winter, because our intention of that project is to go to construction next spring and summer. Bid it late winter, early spring, get it into the spring, summer construction next year. Because the DOT project we know is going to take longer, the Phase 2 project. So what we'd want to do is not really have these projects, if we can avoid it, we don't want to have the projects going on at the same time. We'd really like a staged construction. That offers a lot of flexibility on impact, to the community as we kind of go through the corridor. You've already seen when they're just doing the ramps that there can be some interruptions, as you're going. So we don't want to disrupt, the whole corridor at the same time. And so the projects just kind of want to lean that way to begin with, and it works out schedule-wise that way pretty well. Construction duration, likely about 4 months to 6 months for each project. The DOT project really depends on when we get it in and get it started. How much can we get done before the winter really is upon us? And do we have to shut anything down, or can they kind of work right through the winter? And for instance, in the spring, the only thing to be done is put the trees in the ground because, they weren't able to be installed that early. So that'll flush itself out as we get further along. You can go ahead, George, into the next step. Basically, we kind of went through this already, but that's kind of my to-do list for the next 30 days or less. George, if you want to flip to the next question for thoughts, questions, and comments, I just have one thing that I want to kind of show the break of the projects being right here at this crosswalk. Okay. So the break of the projects being right here at this crosswalk and right here at this crosswalk, it's interesting that you've basically got one business owner that is affected by the entire project. They're engulfed by the project. That comment came up at the last meeting. We listened, and as we kept working and started thinking, I said, geez, it might almost be a godsend that there is 2 projects because the building won't be impacted on 3 sides all at the same time. So we're really, trying our best to limit the impacts. There will be impacts. I'll never stand up here and say, oh, it's going to be perfect, park everywhere. But we are going to maintain access to people's places, and we are going to maintain traffic moving through there. We're going to have to build crosswalks 1 half at a time, that type of thing, to flag people through. That's a part of downtown, construction or any roadway construction. But it's an important leave behind as I set you up for the questions here for us is that, we're cognizant and paying close attention to trying to limit the impacts, on each of you, of the businesses and the property owners. So Jean, do you want to just kind of open the floor and anybody has questions?
I'll walk around with the mic, so if you just wait for the mic, you can raise your hand if you have questions or comments.
Just a couple of questions. I'm Bill Powers. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Improvement District, and our office is right on the corner where all of this is going to happen. So,
okay.
We've been talking to some of the business owners. Just a couple things from your presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't here in June. I wasn't in the position at that point. I just started. Just a couple of things. Number one, when you're putting the tree wells in, there are some existing ones now. I know that you were looking at also trying to get some sort of demarcation for, where people's utilities are coming in the buildings. Just the one thing that I keep hearing from business owners in particular, don't block my sign if you're putting a tree up, because we've all gone through the approval processes, and I'm not sure if you're moving any of those tree wells or how that works.
Okay.
All right.
So the answer is we are definitely moving some of the tree wells.
Okay, good.
When we walked the corridor, we identified certain spots that we didn't want to block a mural, a window, a door, things of that nature. So what we ended up doing basically is we had that as a canvas, and we're not 100% yet. I guarantee we can go through the plans and we'll find a couple that were like, that's got to be over there.
Sure.
We're trying to develop a consistent rhythm, and you'll see spots when you look at a kind of that plan over here is a little bit better, but you'll see spots where there's holes and there's teeth missing, and it's intentional that whether it was that. So we're cognizant of it. We tried to do a layout to be respectful of that. Tightness of some corridors we left out, but in front of the coffee house, there's a mural right there. So we looked at that and said, geez, we really can't put something there to really block that. If people are using it as for a cafe, we didn't want to, as business owners, we didn't want to disrespect people by saying, I don't care how you use the sidewalk. it's a city sidewalk, but at the same time, we want to pay respect to, okay, this is a business that's thriving by using the sidewalk, so let's see how we can design the project to not change the plan for them, but how we can accommodate them. So we're going to have to chase through the corridor a little bit more on the trees and whatnot, but we're trying to be very cognizant of windows and doors, viewing locations, intersections to try to keep views open.
Okay. Just a couple other quick things. That was number one. Number two, are the bike racks designated on the schematics anywhere, or are they still
We do have
to
them on
be
the
planned?
schematics.
Okay.
It's a little tough to see in a PowerPoint. It is on here, and
Okay.
they are designed and located in a, let's call it a conceptual first blush review of them. I'd value anybody's input, specifically, people that live, work, and eat here. I do not. I work for a company that has George that is here, quite often, but you know your streets a lot better than I do. So if the business district or any of the owners have a real need or a real perception of the value, welcome
Okay.
those comments and
We'll provide
suggestions.
that to you. We have
Yeah.
some ideas.
Same
on
thing with trash receptacles. There's a lot of them. There are indications of where they are. In the plan, they're color coded with like an ABC letter, so you can see those. Benches, same thing. Right now, there are not many out there right now. The placement of benches is an interesting dynamic. Some of your buildings have I shouldn't call them that. They have fairly blank facades. So there's opportunities potentially to have a bench kind of at that facade versus others where I'm not a big fan personally of having the backs to the street, but for instance, at the bump outs, you've got a nice potential width of a median and planted strip where that bench could back up to that and then be an inviting space versus, I wouldn't put a bench 2 feet, away from the parked car. You want the benches to face the street typically. So they're suggested on there by all means, but not beholden to placement.
Okay. On the trash receptacles, is it going to be the same ones that we have now? Because we get a lot of complaints. A lot of the trash falls down in between the trash can and the actual receptacle, and there's a lot of trash that accumulates in the bottom. So I'm not sure that design works for our downtown.
Looking at the models that they are, I understand exactly what you're saying because I've seen some of them that way. Some of that's the control of it is the inserts that are put in there. There's the wrong inserts in some of those. This is also a type of trash receptacle that has a lid that has a lid that basically is removable. So some of them have chains on them to keep people from taking them with them. It's not a bad receptacle design as a unit. I think there's improvements to that unit with the inserts that would stop some of that trash clutter. And a lot of it's just traditional upkeep too. It's got an outer ring that's a decent stock, steel ring, and some of them are bent. So it takes pretty good, either a car hit it, maybe it was placed wrong, or people were just aggressive with it. So open to suggestions, but the current project right now is to maintain the ones that are there and refurbish them and reset them in better locations.
Okay. And then just one other quick thing. The bioretention, which is on Division Street, I know the reason why it's there, but it's just not maintained, and people always think it's just a weedy kind of a spot. So if you're putting more in, we're going to keep getting that kind of same response. So is there any way to control that better without it being a maintenance issue? Because that's really what it is.
Plant selection is a part of it. You can pick bioretention plant material that is less maintenance intensive, more ornamental grasses, things like that really have less of a weed appearance, I guess, for people to have that perception.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the one on Division Street, but it looks like a weedy kind of a spot.
It does boil down to maintenance.
Yeah.
It's plain and simple, boils down to maintenance. When I do herb gardens for people and whatnot, it looks like a weed garden. Well,
But in the center of town, when you're doing all of these improvements, it
They
just
are
detracts
pulled off.
from.
They are pulled off successfully in cities across the U.S., but it requires dedicated personnel. So one of the examples that you saw in the bump out, and you'll see in the presentation, is essentially if you were to replace that bioretention with a decorative pavement or something like that. It's the same geometry, same forms, it's just more of a traditional urban treatment. We could still do that, have an inlet that takes the water, because it's going to trap water in the corners. So we can still implement that, because your water is going to trap right here in this corner. And right now, your structure is about here on your street. So we would need to do the same thing from a stormwater management one way or another. You're just not getting the environmental stewardship, so to speak, of the bioretention. But it requires maintenance, or it will look weedy. I mean, it's, you can plant ornamental grasses and maintain kind of a consistency there, and it'll look more like, an ornamental grass garden, almost a little more kept like out in front of the library here. You can do that versus having the rudbeckias and the other things that are not like urban plants in my mind. But it's maintenance. Everything grows weeds, even in cities. Your tree pits, in various spots have weeds in them, because even tree pits will grow weeds.
Thank you.
Your utilities, to back up on that 1 second there, we have done a subsurface investigation by mark out, by calling in the safe dig mark, or the mark out companies, and getting those put on our plans. The plans are here. I'm more than happy to leave a set or give more sets to the city. However the mechanism is, that's best. If anybody knows any more information about their water and sewer, the information we have is as good as we could get from record information that we were able to acquire. So the end result is you start construction, and we think we know where most everything is, but the real honest answer is there's probably some that are there, and maybe a building owner, landowner, knows something about that. So it's intentional that we have those to be left. It's hard for people to visualize, but that's why we have the larger plans, that hopefully that'll help them.
Hi, I'm second. My name is Frank Semino. I own a building on South Street. In fact, the building has Gleason's Restaurant. You probably stopped by. I have a couple of questions, issues, and some of them were picked up by Bill. And that is where the bike racks are going to go, where the benches are going to go, but then where the lighting is going to go. Are you going to replace or add or take away, move the lighting?
Okay.
Wait, let me finish.
Yep.
Let's see, the bike and the trash receptacles. I kind of like to see recyclable kind of trash receptacles like they have in bigger cities. And, we're spending this kind of money, we might as well look like we've done something green. So what you were saying, I think there should be another step to analyze where the placement of the lighting and the size of the trees. I had a couple of trees in front of my building, and I had them taken down because they were 3 stories tall, and my building is 2 stories, and they were planted 50 years ago, and the roots were, the leaves were, everything was creating. And at that time, I learned that there are certain kinds of trees to go in a downtown area that doesn't grow 3 stories tall. You mentioned a couple. I'm no expert in it, but I'm sure
Yep.
you'll recommend the right ones. I have a question about why there is a bump out on South and Nelson, I think it is.
Union.
Why was that brought up, a recommendation or someone?
That was a recommendation in the original grant application done by another consultant. And as we viewed it and as we understood the dialogue of the community on that, it was that was an intersection as kind of a gateway, because the character is really built 1 block behind that, but it really changes at that intersection. So as a gateway into your community, one of the planning mechanisms for creating a gateway is to bring the streetscape in and kind of frame that edge. But more importantly, in my mind, is that's a long sidewalk. That sidewalk's kind of got that real crown to it, or crosswalk, sorry, it's not sidewalk. Crosswalk's got a real kind of mean crown to it at that point. And it takes people a long time to get through that intersection, which is A, unsafe for them, and B, a time delay when it comes to traffic and get people through that light. You know, that light's fairly quick light. I went up through it tonight from the north, kind of going up the hill, and it changed fairly quickly, you know, on me, I noticed.
Well, I agree with that notion that it kind of begins the gateway,
Yep.
you know. I've been in Peekskill about 10 years. I'm sure there's people here 50 years. Mike, where are you? One of the problems the downtown has is that sometimes it's limited to Division Street, where that's the town. That's the downtown area. And I was on the bid a couple of years ago, and we've discussed expanding the downtown, that one street. And the focus at the time was kind of like Paramount, walking around the street and seeing Division Street down the block, and that's it. So, I mean, to a pedestrian walk. And by, I think, adding that bump out, if that's the correct notion, it kind of expands. It leads to more downtown stores, a larger downtown. So I think it's a good idea, basically. But there is a problem, I think, on South and Division. Coming from the west, driving towards the T, there are tractor trailers, there are all kinds of cars that pass that day, and they got to stop, and there is one sign that says, make a right or a left. And that sign is right up on the corner. And I think there should be some look at, review of a traffic signage, and that signage is kind of buried to the right, and there's a tree over it and stuff like that. What I'm getting to is using the same idea of that bump out.
Mm-hmm.
I have a building that contains a restaurant that's been there for 100 years called Miller's. It's kind of a landmark. And I'm not saying it's a landmark, but there is presently a restaurant there. And I was thinking to use that bump out idea by extending his first parking lane to expand it into an area where you could put the signage, you could put a light, you could put tables. Now, when you're down at the Paramount walking into the town, making the right, now you see more of the downtown. You see umbrellas or whatever he puts up, and whatever signage we could put there for better traffic control. Those are my thoughts. I think, the traffic signage, you made a comment that it doesn't need anything. I think it does, but that's my opinion. That light on South Street, I put it there. Not that I put it there. I complained that there was no light. There was no light there. So I'm not an expert, but I think you should have a lighting review, analysis of at night. Maybe there's some dark spots.
Yeah, we've got
the placement of lighting should be looked at.
The lights are on the plan. It's fairly robust, I guess, in the lighting plan. The idea right now, because the project does have its bounds and its costs, so right now the intention is to supplement the Cobras, that are the overhead lights that are there, with the pedestrian lights, but essentially have the pedestrian lights for the most part stand on their own when it comes to safe and appropriate light levels, so that there's opportunity to decommission the Cobra overhead lights, which are less downtown oriented than the pedestrian lights. The exact count, I couldn't tell you, but I've been doing lighting plans for quite a long time. When we're done with the project, that's not to say I'm not concerned at all, because I'm concerned about every design element, but we will have a lot of new LED high-performance, pedestrian scale 16-foot lights that properly hit our crosswalks that maybe aren't hit right now with the right light.
So you're going to replace existing light poles?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a couple of replacements, and there's a lot of new infill lights along the corridor.
The other area that I think you should have some more attention to is the area of the Paramount. That is, you ever been here on a Friday, Saturday night when there's a lot of people standing in the streets and the police do block off that street? But along the wall of the Hudson Room, there's really nothing. We tried by putting a signage sign there, and we found that people don't read it. But if you take a look at that area, I kind of always thought it would be like a nice piazza. I think that's it.
I'm Carol Capobianco. I chair the Conservation Advisory Council here in Peekskill. And of course, I have something to say about trees.
Sure.
I think this is a great opportunity to add trees to the downtown. It's been a very hot area to walk, especially around the bank area, so I'm glad to see more trees coming in. And for businesses, you should know that there are studies that people walk on the side of the street that have the trees because it's shade, and they end up going into the stores more on that side, just to let you know. But I think that we need to expand the species list. The species list you've chosen here, they're overused. We don't want to use more than 10% of any one species in the city in case there is a blight, then we
Right.
lose our tree canopy. And we sent to the city recently, to DPW Chief Brent, about 36 species, native species actually, from the Cornell Urban Forestry Program that are recommended for street trees that I would suggest that maybe you could look at. For instance, the honey locust, the London plane tree, and the lindens are overused, and they are large trees. And I know there were 2 locusts, I think, that you took down in front of your store, your building. The serviceberry is a great choice. It's a shorter tree, and I think there should be a blend of larger trees and smaller trees. And I will send this to you, this list of about 36 species. And we have the opportunity of mixing things up now instead of using the same look.
We are not intending to have a monoculture for the various points you made. I don't want to banter landscape architectural tree selection, but I'm always conflicted with the term overused trees. There's a reason they're overused. They're good trees. They're very useful, and they're very hardy, and people want them because they perform well and they do the job they're supposed to do. So that's why they're overused.
Well, I also think that sometimes it's like using the Crayola 8 crayon box versus the 64 crayon box. We need to broaden out our experiences and our choices, and I think it's just that other trees aren't so well known. The way the serviceberry is now being known better by landscape architects and being used more because it is a great tree. So we have this list, and there are a lot of great trees on this
Sure.
species list.
And I've seen the list, but yeah, absolutely, send it along, and I'll give you
I
my
know,
card.
I would recommend against the honey locust, the plane tree, and the lindens only because they are overused. The linden, perhaps not, but if you just go up Division Street a little farther, you'll see that the ash trees are having the problem. And I'm not saying there's an emerald ash borer yet, but if you have the same tree planted and there's a disease, then we lose our canopy.
Sure, absolutely.
So I also want to talk about the tree pits. I like that there is a larger tree pit on the side of the other side of the bank side of the street. It sounded like you may be shrinking that to match the other side.
No, the tree pits themselves are generally speaking along the corridor. I think right now we have them as 5x5s.
Okay.
All of them. The only ones that might be the exception of that is we were looking at Esther Street, and that picture showed, it's a pretty kind of stark streetscape. The pavements will change the look and feel, but there's really not much vertical in there. So I was looking at a couple of trees and trying to get trees, whether it's the serviceberry or something of that nature, we haven't decided on. But I'm trying to get a couple of vertical elements there. But with the narrowness, I'd probably have to go with a smaller, it's only like 8 feet, about 8 feet sidewalk. So you either have to use a tree grate or people will be walking over top of it. So we'd probably make those a little bit smaller. But the rest as a template throughout the corridor would be a 5x5.
That's a good size.
We have contemplated the area of the London Plains that's here at the edge of the parking. You know, they're nice, big old trees. No sense to, in my mind, to take them down. But one thing I've looked at is there's no edge between that parking and the street right now. You have the parking and the meters all banked right up to the sidewalk, and it's just a free flow between there. And so the trees aren't protected, the tree pits. And so we're starting to look at analyses. Can we do a landscape, you know, hedge type border that really creates that? Does it need a fence or does it not really need a fence? What's the appropriate measure there? So that may be the one spot on the plan that we go beyond the world of tree selection.
Well, the textile material you were talking about, it doesn't sound very attractive. I'm sure it's low maintenance, but I would prefer a natural look with the soil. Leading to the question about character, you talked about the concrete, stamped concrete versus brick. You talked about historic
That's money.
preservation as well.
Some of these decisions are also based on the fact that we have a finite amount of money
Okay.
to try to do all the work, and what's the city doing in other spots, or what they're intending to do on the other spots. You know, can we afford? I wouldn't say any of these decisions are set in stone yet, but the direction is that, and that's where I said when we do this estimate, we'll be a little bit more informed, because that might say, oh, there's some wiggle room to change some of this. But that's a big part of it. I don't want you to think that I think that stamped colored concrete is a historic precedent, because it's not a historic precedent.
Okay. And also, please no black mulch. You had talked about the front of the library, and they have black mulch there. Please no black mulch. But, you know, talking about historic preservation, how much of historic preservation is in your thought process? Because there is a Historic Preservation and Landmark Board here who looks at everything in the downtown, from the signs, everything the historic front can do. So are you applying that historic look to your designs? Because some of this doesn't seem so with the, you know, the stamped concrete, some of the designs of the bike racks, and I'm not saying you have to go back to the beginning of time, but are you taking any historic charm or character in your designs to make sure it blends with some of the buildings and the preservation that is going on here?
I'd say the site furnishings, I mean, the bike racks, you could have hours of dialogue on what's a historic precedent of a bike rack or not. The city standards for the streetlights is pretty much a given at this point. They're a decorative fluted pole, a semi-historic look of an acorn post top. That kind of sets some of the precedents for some of the other material that would have to blend with that. Signage, as far as wayfinding or pedestrian signage, is not really a part of the scope of the project. So therefore, I haven't done a whole lot of historical context look at that. I think, you know, the street trees need to blend, be native, be historical to the region at least, you know, at a minimum. So there's some historical context there. But, you know, stamp colored concrete was not done, you know, historically. It's a given. It's an understanding. So I wouldn't say we're ignorant or not trying to pay attention to it or ignoring it. But there's only certain things that we're having an effect, you know, on that. The majority of the project is concrete repair and replacement, you know, curb and concrete repair and replacement, not to underscore the validity of anything else we're trying to do. But the you know, the bump outs, there's precedents for those, you know, recently and historically, and a lot of the furnishings.
If I think of my other question,
Sure.
I'll come back to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Weeks from Arthur Weeks Jewelers, and I have a question regarding the timing of the project. I guess I'm on phase 2 of the corner of South and Division Street, And as one of the few retailers left in town, and this will affect the restaurants too, but the biggest part of my year is December, November and December. So I would just like to see, how much it will impact us in December of that 2016. Now, how is that going to affect us, and is there a way to move the project along a little quicker, that type of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our intention with the DOT side of the project is to move on our side as fast as we can, control everything, to get bids out as soon as we can, to give enough bid periods so we get value back to the city and to everybody. You get respectable bids. Knowing there's always an impact, the schedules are, depending on your type of environment, some places, I'm from near Saratoga Springs and worked in Saratoga Springs, and it's August, you can't do anything, that's the track. A lot of businesses are, like you said, the holidays. So our intention right now is to start in that fall period and try to get everything done that we can to kind of close for the winter, would be my theory and my thought going in. We're going to work as well as we can through the process, knowing that the Christmas time, Thanksgiving to Christmas is kind of a key time to go out and eat, shop, things of that nature. We will do everything to be respectful of that and try to be not that impactful to it. It'll all depend if we start, August, September, October, November. For instance, if the job can start in early August, there's a 4-month window. Contractor didn't get quite a lot done except for maybe, the trees, or maybe even within a window of that. It's early November is kind of your cutoff point. So this early in the process, I won't stand up here and tell you, absolutely won't work between now and, that date and that date, because I don't control all the schedule myself, or we don't, and the city doesn't, for your project, being the Phase 2 Brown Street. But I'm glad it's on record with your comment as far as the timing of business. It helps reinforce, the impact of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One other question regarding the trees. On the South Street side of our building, we have a large tree that's getting quite big. Do you have any plans of taking that out and putting in something smaller?
Right now, it is not shown to be removed. Right now, it's shown to stay. I often battled personally with that question and thought, because, geez, it's an awful big tree. It's awful nice. You hate to lose that much shade in the downtown, on a streetscape. But then the other side of it is it doesn't kind of match the rest. So right now, I'm showing the tree to stay.
Okay.
Thank you. Arnie Paglia, you work for the city of Peekskill?
Yeah,
Is that correct?
we have a contract to do the design of the project. The Chasing Companies does for the city. Yep.
Right, because I understand that the project and the project area on North Division Street is different from the project that's happening here. And the reason I asked the question is some of the design, and it's all very nice and well thought out, but it has to be applied somewhat to what we can handle in the city of Peekskill. Like you said about so many of these things, it's maintenance. So if we end up with, let's say, a bump out is nice, but how is snow removal handled in that bump out? If there's something that can be done to coordinate the beginning of the use of pay stations, if you're doing all this work, which is disruptive to our business, but, long-term beneficial, that, hopefully if the city can determine what they're doing with the pay stations versus parking meters before you put the new sidewalks in.
That's my hope. It's been a conversation we've had over the last few weeks now, and it was a new conversation as of a few weeks ago, and it's definitely my hope, because the last thing I want to do is tell somebody afterwards to go and plug, 50 holes,
Right.
in the sidewalk.
And you mentioned a lot of the things you were talking about was trying to keep some consistency throughout the downtown. A comment on the light fixtures. They're not holding up well, the ones that we have, so I don't know if it's a different manufacturer, but they seem to be the ones I see on my block, and they're not holding up well, so I don't know if there's something that, if they've made improvements to the
In which-
aluminum.
In what capacity? Just
Those
curious.
bottom pieces, they're broken.
The bases?
The bases are broken, yeah.
They do have steel versus aluminum. I'll look at this standard again. We'll talk to the city engineer. But there are more than one manufacturer of it and all that. It just depends what city contracting and things like that. But glad you brought it up.
You mentioned some consistency, whether that be the stamped concrete or signage. If you can work with the city, I mean, we need parking signs. We need signs to direct people to where the parking is for many, many years. And there's, some of these pieces could come along sooner. Like, I'd rather get some new garbage pails now rather than next year because we need them. And again, speaking to what you said there, where they pointed out that garbage falls between, it's either the wrong insert or the fact that that garbage may have been there for the last 4 years. So if some of your comments can be directed to what you hear from the community and from just what the city can handle as far as maintenance goes.
Yeah, it's important to, underscore we're, George and I are hired to do a job, but we're hired to do a job that makes as many people, happy and work together as possible. We have the city, is trying their best to appease everybody, and so we're blending this together. But I don't want you to think I'm up here dictating this is what I'm going to do. This is what we think is the best plan for the funding that we have and the best value back and the best accommodations we can make. So I'm here to work for you just as much as anybody from the city.
We appreciate that and appreciate this meeting. I just knew about this meeting. I did get an email, which I didn't read thoroughly, and I ran into Bill Powers before, so came over. If you're walking the street, I would strongly suggest popping into the stores because many people don't hear about these meetings, and they can give you a great deal of information block by block. You mentioned timing of the lights. I mean, those are things that need to be addressed just overall in the downtown. So sometimes you're trying to shrink that sidewalk, but maybe the light's just not timed right. And we have a lot of those issues driving around the town. It's a very difficult town to go 4 blocks sometimes. You can lose a lot of time with the lights. So I would hope in the information that you get, you're forthright with the city too, to what observations you have about things. There's the mention of those green grassed areas that we have on North Division Street. And we've changed the grates in this, I guess as part of this project, we've changed the grates on the storm drains to stop garbage flowing to the Hudson. But on North Division Street for the last 17 years, we have sewage running in the storm drains. And matter of fact, that last green area that we were discussing was one more sewer grate that we didn't find. When we do our outdoor dining and we do our outdoor street events, we cover the grates so the methane and the sewer gas doesn't come out. We just discovered that towards the end of the summer, that we had one more place to cover. So I thank you for your efforts, and I thank Carol for her suggestions on the trees. I am with the Division Street Grill, and also, and one last comment on Esther Street. Would you be thinking about a smooth surface on that street as compared to a stamped concrete? Because let's say a smooth colored concrete would be more friendly for every purpose on that street, and probably less expensive and more durable.
I put some thought to it. Actually, the other day I was thinking to myself, need a little bit more study to understand the effects of sound really on the businesses too. As you come down, you have the braking and the rumble. There's a little bit more I have to kind of wrap my I keep saying with me, but it's my design team. We have to wrap our hands around, is that a concern? What's the value, that's given back? The parking, I think, needs to be delineated from it. I think there's some special treatments, that can be done to really make that space, unique and attractive. Whether it's smooth, rubble, ashlar pattern, brick pattern, any of that hasn't been finalized yet.
Is there anything, and I doubt it, but anything that could be done on Brown Street or South Street to increase parking with any angle-in parking where you have those large sidewalks?
I looked at the geometries in general. Without that sidewalk on South Street's really your widest sidewalk there gets to be, almost 16 feet, or so. But with the geometry of the roadway, I'm not real comfortable that you can get head-in parking, and then back people out and have it not affect the transportation network dramatically and really narrow that sidewalk. So I don't believe so. I did chase the entire project corridor to say, are we being inefficient by giving 24 feet to a pull-in parallel parking space off of a loading zone, and they only really truly need in that application 21 or 20, so I did look at that. I found a couple of feet here and there, our team did, but I didn't find a space per se. So I think the way they're done now, some of them they're jammed in, pretty tight, so I was hoping to find, a couple more spaces, so if I had to lose any here and there, I could have a good counter argument. But
And just lastly, are you looking at any other parts of the downtown as part of what you're doing?
we've reviewed some of the other plans in general, but we are not actively working on any of the others, so I've just kind of had a cursory overview.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Roya. I'm the owner of the Coop, which is at the Flatiron Building. And I don't know if what I'm saying has anything that you can help me with, but I felt like that this last 2 weeks, it really did affect my business. And the communication about the parking was really bad. People didn't know if they could park, if they couldn't park. They were supposed to pave today. I didn't see anybody. So if that could be clarified a little better.
I guess just in quick summary of my thoughts. I'm not involved, or Jason's not involved with that one that county's doing, but it is important to have a communication with the people. What we typically do on projects is when you're about to go to construction, you have a kind of an open house. I've done it before, where you have kind of a coffee house, open house for the business owners that want to participate. And at that point, we can kind of spell out a little bit more clearly, okay, the hours are X to X, on this. Here's the contact person. We'll have a full-time, one of the things on this project is we'll have a full-time representative on the project on site all day, every day. So you have a clearinghouse person for issues such as that you've experienced. You say, okay, what's going on? What are you doing or not doing? So there are some things we do along the way to try to make that better, but that's some of what I call the limiting the interruptions. But, as you can tell, it's even with good communication, there's still some interruption. But I think the greater good was maybe mentioned earlier, and that's kind of, I can't say that's how you have to look at it, but that's a big part of it is, we're going to try to make this experience of rebuilding your streets, as easy on the people and least disruptive to their businesses as possible, so that you can enjoy the next 10 to 20 years of nice, fresh, adequate sidewalks.
Just a quick question. I'm assuming the historic marker in front of Weeks Jeweler will be kept there? The post road marker?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Gene, this gentleman has a question.
Thank you, Paul Toronto. I'm sorry, I just found out about the meeting here, so I was late. I'm just curious, you may have addressed this so I apologize. This particular first phase will be done in December?
The first phase of the project, George, if you want to flip back 2 slides, or 3 slides. There you go. Oop. So basically, between now and, what this shows is between now and through this winter, is when we're going to have the designs completed for Brown Street and Esther Street. We're going to send that out to bid here late winter, early spring. That's usually a 60-day window at least to get through the bidding process and get the city to be able to award the project. Might even be a 3-month. So that pushes us out into, kind of the early summer, maybe late spring. Probably pushes you into that.
So from now until?
June. Let's say we start that project hypothetically right now. Yep.
I just want to clarify something so that everybody understands, is that what's going on right now on the street, that's a different project than this. That is a county project, and they're just doing paving, okay? So that project is being run by the county. I'm not 100% sure when they're going to be done. I know they've milled the street, and now they just have to pave it. So I think they're almost done. This is this is a project that the city is doing that we're talking about. And this is a streetscape, which means sidewalks and trees. So that's a different project than what's going on now. So this project hasn't started construction yet. That's what we're talking about. There's 2 phases to this project. The first phase is Brown and Esther Street, and that would possibly start, what are we saying, spring, summer of 2016.
Yeah, it's like
Right.
June, July, August, September.
So I think that's what you're referring to.
Or maybe
am I
May,
right?
May
I don't want to get
May
people
to
mixed
August,
up
May
that
to
what's going
September.
on right now is not this project at all. Okay.
So for that project, how do we find out any information about the county project?
I would call the city DPW, because they're certainly aware of the project, but it is the county doing the project, so I have to make that clear that the city doesn't have 100% control over the project because it's county. So whatever problems you're having, you may want to call the county, but our DPW does know and is talking to the people there.
So these concept plans aren't actually roads, they're sidewalks?
Sidewalks, exactly. This is only sidewalks.
Yeah, we started by saying basically curb to building,
I see.
sidewalk,
I see.
sidewalk and curb.
Yep. Okay, so you good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay.
And I'll be glad to stay for a bit if anybody, has something at their business. I can run you through the plans maybe for the bids purpose of the ones we're going to leave so that you can kind of understand the dead in, dead out, process, for capturing some of that. But I want to thank the people that did come tonight. Any input's great. Like I said, here to work for you, not in spite of you. So any comments, my email is there. And Gene's is as well, and I think Matt's going to be involved in the project as well. So, however you want to funnel information is fine with me. I will share and distribute if anything comes to me direct. Thank you.